Some people love to hate Harbor Freight, but I found there are many useful things that you need from Harbor Freight. So I'm going to look at tools that you need from Harbor Freight that really make more sense to buy there than anywhere else. I've got 22 tools I want to point out to you, or in some cases they're categories of tools, plus a few general comments I want to make about buying tools at Harbor Freight, because you can get your money's worth buying them there better than anywhere else. So let me say this before I get into the actual list. I buy some tools at Harbor Freight. Why do I buy some tools at Harbor Freight? Money. It really boils down to money. I can buy them cheaper at Harbor Freight than I can buy them anywhere else. And if the quality is good enough to do the job, then why should I spend more? Now notice I say good enough to do the job, not the best quality. Sometimes we overbuy. And I have been guilty of that too. You know, we buy it because, well, that's the best. Okay, that's great if you need the best. But if you don't need the best, why are you spending the money on the best? Now, there's a couple of categories where we might say you don't really need the best. One is if it's a professional tool and you're not doing it professionally. Okay, I have a Milwaukee drill driver over here. All right, I bought it because the consumer level drill driver I bought went out on me. All right, I'd had it for a number of years. I got my money's worth out of it. It was time to replace it. I'm doing more woodworking now. I'm doing some professional stuff, so therefore it made sense to buy a better drill driver, and so I bought a Milwaukee. On the other hand, I have a hammer drill that I rarely use. I think I've used it 3 times in the 5 years I've had it. It did not make sense to buy a Milwaukee hammer drill and pay about 2.5 times as much as what I ended up paying for the, we could say, budget brand that I bought. All right, so that's one category of you don't need more. Another one is that sometimes tools can be overbuilt for the purpose in which you are going to use them. And that's maybe a little hard to gauge, okay? And it's different from one person to another, and of course it's different from one project to another. Let's take this clamp, for example. This is just a regular F-clamp, screw-threaded F-clamp, and I've got a bunch of these. And there are probably better quality clamps around. But this is a 6-inch clamp. I mean, it's not like I'm clamping a whole table with this. And this is adequate to the task. Now, I can buy this one, and it's adequate to what I need, or I can spend more money buying a more expensive one and just spend more money. And maybe it might look nice there on my wall that, ooh, he's got an orange one instead of a blue one. So what? Okay? So that's another way we can end up spending more than we need to. So we really need to evaluate carefully what it is that we are buying and why we're buying it. And with that in mind, Harbor Freight is a great source for some things. And the things I'm going to mention to you today, I'm saying they're tools that everyone needs. Maybe you don't need them, okay? Maybe you don't need a hydraulic floor jack, all right? I get it. These are things that I have found to be highly useful. And in some cases, I'm talking categories rather than individual items. And so I'm mentioning because if you've got to buy one, if you need one, take a good look at Harbor Freight, because you'll probably be satisfied with what you get there and save yourself some money. And you know what that means, right? That means you get to buy more tools, okay? So let's start out and let's look at these 22 items that I see that are tools that are well worth buying at Harbor Freight. And I'm going to start with hand tools, okay, which is, I've broadened that a little bit. And the first thing I want to mention is the roll-around toolbox. Now, I have 2 roll-around toolboxes. One is a Craftsman and the other one is from Harbor Freight. And it's their, I think they call it US General is the brand. Okay, you should be able to see the picture there on the screen. It's a great toolbox. I paid, now, you know, Harbor Freight's got this thing where you get a coupon and you get 20%. It used to be 25%, but now it's 20% off of anything at a regular price. So I bought this at 25% off the regular price of, I think at that time, if I remember correctly, it was $299. So I may be wrong, which brought it down to about $220, $230. Regular price for this right now is $399, so that would bring it down by a whole $100 if I had that $25 coupon. That's a better deal you can find on toolboxes than anywhere else. It's rugged, it holds up well, it's got nice ball bearing glides for the drawers, and it holds a lot of weight. And that's the real killer on these toolboxes, is can they hold the weight? This can hold the weight. So I highly recommend their toolboxes. And they've got this brand line, and then they've got another one, I think they call it Icon, that's really professional grade. And they're actually made of thicker steel than the toolboxes by Snap-on. Now, that's not saying the whole toolbox is better, but that's giving you an idea how rugged they are. So I highly recommend their toolboxes, okay, if you need roll-around toolboxes. The second thing I'd like to mention in hand tools is their SAE and metric combination T-handle ball end hex key set. Now this is actually something I do not have, although I have used it, all right? I think of all the different hex keys sets that are out there, this is the most versatile and the most useful. One, it's ball end, which is really nice if you got an alignment issue. Secondly, it has both metric and SAE. Thirdly, it's T-handle, which makes it a whole lot easier when you're trying to tighten or loose something. This is a really just a good general all-around hex key set. Most of us have cheap Allen wrenches, and we struggle working with them. Well, if you actually end up using them a lot, like say putting tools together and taking apart, you may want to consider buying a better set. And this is a great set, and it's only $20. Okay. Next item I'd like to mention, I've got sitting here, and that's this. This is a transfer punch set. Now, most woodworkers don't use transfer punches, but we actually need them. Where you use transfer punches is if you're trying to get holes lined up from one piece to another. Let's say you got a piece of hardware you're putting on something, and you got to get the hole centered. All right, it's really nice to have a center punch make that hole. That's what this is for. This is a set of, I don't know, 20-some punches, ranging in sizes from a 1/16 up to a 1/2 inch. And what they allow you to do is center it exactly in that hole, because you've got the punch the same size as the hole. Make that dimple there like you would with a center punch, so you can get your drill hole right where you need it. This is a $11.99 tool. Now, when I bought it, it was $9.99. Okay, it's gone up since then. It's a $11.99 tool. And for $11.99, you've got a tool that's going to save you a lot of headaches. And that's why it's worth having. I didn't have one for years. I didn't even know they existed for years. I was an engineer, and I'd never heard of transfer punches. I don't know how I missed out on that. But when I ran across them, I said, oh my gosh, I've been needing those for years. I wish I'd known about them. I've bought it. I don't use it every day. I might use it once every couple of weeks, but those times I use it, it's well worth having. And then there's a whole host of other hand tools that Harbor Freight has that are really decent tools, even the low-cost ones, okay? I've got a 1/2 inch breaker bar sitting over there with one of my toolboxes that I've had for 20, 30 years. It's about that long, and when you need a heavy-duty breaker bar, that thing's great. I've got some pry bores, same thing. I've got some wrenches. I've got various different things. Now, I'm not really getting into those because we're talking woodworking tools here, and those aren't woodworking tools, okay? Nevertheless, if you're just needing general tools, hand tools, I would highly recommend taking a look at what Harbor Freight has. Now, look with a discerning eye, because I'm sure they've got some that are better than others. You know, you might see a set of wrenches there, or you might see a ratchet there that's just obviously cheaply made. Okay, pass it over. But if you're trying to save money, you're probably going to do a better job of saving money on those types of tools at Harbor Freight than you are anywhere else, okay? All right, so let's move on to clamping. Now, clamping is a place I think Harbor Freight is really, really useful. I have a number of different Harbor Freight clamps that I use regularly that I just think are wonderful, okay? I'm going to start off with this little F-clamp that I mentioned before, this little 6-inch F-clamp. This costs a whole $3.49, and every once in a while you can find them on sale for $2.99, or maybe less, okay? There are times when you need 6-inch bar clamps, and generally speaking, when you need them, you need a bunch of them. I've got about a dozen of these things, and I'm thinking about buying more. Why? Because when I use them, I often need many of them. Like if I'm clamping a couple boards together to get greater thickness, these things are absolutely wonderful. They're great for attaching stop blocks to fences or whatever. Attaching pieces to, say, a tenon jig that's running on my table saw, okay? They're great for just general clamping when you don't need a lot of length. Are they the strongest clamp in the world? No, but when you're talking small stuff like this, you really don't need a huge, super powerful clamp. These things are well worth the whole $3.49 you'll spend on it. And yes, you do need a bunch of them, okay? It's that old, you never have enough clamps. Well, that's one way you can make up for that. Let's say you're going to do something that's bent wood. You know, you need a lot of clamps to do bent wood. As long as it's not too thick, those things, or your mold isn't too thick, those things are absolutely ideal for it. That's one of the times I use them, actually. That's one of the reasons I'm thinking of getting more, is the few times I do bent wood things, I really don't have enough clamps. Okay, next type of clamp I want to mention is their Pittsburgh brand 12 and 18-inch bar clamps. These are the fast anti-clamps, you know, the ones that got the trigger that everyone loves using just because they're so fast and easy to work with. Okay, I have 4 of each of these sizes. I've had them for a number of years. I use them all the time. Now, we got to realize one thing when we're talking about this type of clamp, okay? These are not high pressure clamps. So if you need high pressure, you really don't want to be using this. My son very nicely decided to use one of these of mine, and he actually broke the handle trying to tighten it down too much. Okay, hey, the handle's plastic. It's not heavy duty. But there's an awful lot of applications where you need to clamp something, and you don't need that pressure. You just need the clamps. Here again, this is a great place to save money. These cost a whole $4.99 each. Okay, so you can get yourself a dozen or so, and you can have those clamps for those times when you don't need that super powerful clamp. They've never failed me, other than that one that my son broke. They've done great. They've done the job. Are there larger versions of these clamps better? I would not recommend using the larger versions of these clamps for things like doing an edge-glued panel. I don't think you get the tension you need, the pressure you need using this type of clamp. I also think there's a real tendency as you're tightening it up for the wood to shift. So they're not really good for that, okay? Nevertheless, there's still a lot of times when I find this to be very useful. And at the price, you really can't beat it, all right? On those times when you do need a bigger, heavier duty clamp, okay? If you're trying to get clamps, and you know, everybody says, I need more clamps. I don't have enough clamps. Okay, your best bargain going to get larger clamps is to go to Harbor Freight and buy their pipe clamps. Now, their 6-inch bar clamps are, I'm sorry, their half-inch bar clamp, that's half-inch pipe size, okay, are $6.99, and their 3/4 inch are $8.99. Personally, I spend a couple extra bucks and buy the 3/4 inch pipe size because I have seen a half-inch pipe bend in tightening things up, probably over tightening them. Nevertheless, I've seen it happen, okay? They also have an $11.99 version, and the big difference is that the clamp has feet. Now, I don't have any here. I use parallel action clamps, and I have some regular large F-style clamps. If I was to do it again, I would start off with bar clamps. I don't know why I didn't start off with bar clamps. They're definitely a better bargain than buying large F-style clamps. Are they as good as parallel action clamps? If you're trying to do edge glued panels, they probably aren't as good as parallel action clamps at keeping everything straight. However, if you're trying to edge glue things that are really big, you may not be able to get F-style, or I'm sorry, parallel action clamps that are big enough, and then your best bet is to go with the pipe clamps. So yeah, pipe clamps are great. You know, it's hard to go wrong with something like a pipe clamp. And one of the areas that that Harbor Freight in general has always excelled in are simple tools. You know, I mentioned about the pry bars and the breaker bar a little while ago, and other hand tools. They're excellent in that area because there's not a whole lot that can really go wrong with them. Okay, the more complex the tool is, well, then you got to start really looking at what you're getting. One other type of clamp that I really like from Harbor Freight are these 2-inch spring clamps. Now, spring clamps are another one of those you need a bunch of, right? I probably have 2 dozen of these things sitting in a drawer over here in my toolbox. Now, I've got 2 types of clamps. There's the more common, inexpensive clamp, and these have just a rubber dip coating on the tips, and those you end up losing. This one here from Harbor Freight is has got a injection molded, I guess, elastomeric plastic coating that's on the tips. It gives very good grip, better grip than this one does, and it doesn't slide off, and it doesn't tear up. It's a stronger one, okay? These are $2.79 a piece, and they go on sale from time to time. I think when I bought them, I paid either $1.50 or $2 a piece. I've had them for several years, okay? They're a simple tool, but there again, it's one of those things you need a bunch of, and why not get them where you can get them really cheap, okay? Checking my list here. Okay, corner clamps. Now, you've probably seen me in one video or another use these corner clamps. I know that other style of corner clamps, that's the corner with the little pieces that go on, are very popular today, and they're great. I've got some of those too, but I've had these for years. I have 3 of these, and I have one of them that's actually mounted to my other workbench permanently for those times when I need to quickly clamp a 90 degree. I've got 2 more that I can use here on this workbench. And I really like working with these. They've got a large enough jaw, so they really get a good grip. And they're really great for gluing, anytime you're gluing corners together. Now, one of the things I've noticed with using these, and I'll just give you this as a little hint, is that you really need, if say we've got this clamp set up, I got a board going there and a board going there, you need a prop, something underneath the board over here and over here. Otherwise, this corner isn't going to come together exactly right, and you're going to end up with an uneven corner, okay? Now, that's true of any clamp of these types, all right? But these are much better. You can find smaller corner clamps around. One of the things that make these so good is that they're a little larger, a little heftier, but bigger jaw area, so you get a really good grip. That's why I like those. And finally, the last thing I want to mention, oh, by the way, these are $11.99. The last thing I want to mention as far as clamping is concerned is vices. Now, I've got a bench vise, not a woodworking vise, but a bench vise, sitting on attached to my other bench, and then I've got this is an X-Y Vise. You probably don't need an X-Y Vise. Unless you're going to be machining metal, you probably don't need that. Or you need to make some accurate machinist type stuff in your wood, okay? That, when I mount it on the table of my lathe, or not my lathe, my drill press, essentially turns my drill press into a low-cost mill, like a machinist mill, all right? It's nowhere near as accurate. It gets a lot more chatter because it's not really solid like a mill. I mean, those things are massive. They're very heavy, and they do that to reduce chatter. But I've used it for some rather delicate cutting and drilling and even slotting. So it's a very useful tool. On the other hand, the regular bench vise, you know, like a machinist would use or somebody that does metalworking, they're very common. They're very useful for a lot of different things. Every once in a while, you have to cut a piece of metal. You don't want to put it in the bench vise on your woodworking bench. That's what those are for. The reason I recommend them for Harbor Freight is because of their price. The one I've got a 5-inch one sitting over on that other bench, and it's probably been sitting on that bench for about 20 years, and it's as good as new. All right. So if you need that type of a vise, I highly recommend getting it at Harbor Freight. They're a simple item. They're basically iron castings. Okay. So they're not real complex. There's not a whole lot that can go wrong with them. But if you look at cast iron vices elsewhere, you're going to pay 2-3 times as much. All right? The 5-inch one I've got sells for, I believe it's $79.99. And this X-Y Vise sells for $89.99. So really a pretty good deal compared to what you get elsewhere. Okay, let's talk about the real, what they call the elephant in the room. Let's talk about power tools. Now, I've got to say, overall, historically, I have not been a big fan of Harbor Freight's power tools. The reason for that is that their lower-end brands, the ones they've had for a longer time, really aren't that great a quality. I've bought a couple back when I really couldn't afford anything else of their low-cost drill drivers, and they proved that they were low-cost. They did not last, okay? However, Harbor Freight has come out with a couple of new product lines. They are their own product lines. Yes, they're made in China, but just about everything is these days. It's their Bauer and their Hercules. Bauer is considered a high-level consumer tool, and Hercules is created to compete in the professional tool market. I wish them luck with that. That's a very hard market to break into. I don't know if they're going to succeed in that or not, but from everything I understand, they're good quality tools. For that matter, for everything I understand, the Bauer is too. Now, I have to say, I do not own any tools with from the Bauer or Hercules line, so I really can't tell you personally how good they are, okay? That's something you're going to have to experiment with for yourself or find somebody else that has done it. But I think they're worth looking at. I think for the amount of what they're charging for them, for the cost of them, I think they're definitely worth looking at. But there are a few power tools that I have owned, larger power tools, well, mostly larger, that are Harbor Freight that I want to mention. I think they're well worth mentioning because of how well they've lasted. The first one is a right angle grinder. Now, this is their El Cheapo right angle grinder. I think this is Chicago Electric, which is their cheap line. Now, this is the third one of these that I've owned. The first two did not last. Then I learned the secret. This head, the right angle head here, okay, does not have enough grease in it when you buy it. I'll tell you that right now. Just assume it doesn't have enough grease in it. So what you do is when you buy it, you take it home, there's 4 screws to pull this apart, and you'll get the spindle and the gear that's for it, and then there'll be a gear sticking out there. Grab yourself some grease, just regular old automotive El Cheapo grease, put a big glob in there, close it back up. I have had this one at least 10 years. And we're talking a $10 or $20 tool here, okay? And it's lasted. Now, why am I mentioning this? Okay, maybe you're interested in trying out power tool carving, okay? And the basic tool for power tool carving is a right angle grinder, usually a small one like this. Matter of fact, I have a flap wheel sanding disc on here from a little bit of carving that I was doing with this very tool. And that's what I use it for. Now, if you're going to do a lot of power tool carving, like say you're doing chainsaw carving and you want to use a flap wheel or use a right angle grinder to finish things up or something, buy yourself a good one. But if you're just wanting to try it out, save yourself the money, buy a low-cost one from Harbor Freight, and when it finally gives out on you, and I don't know how long that'll be, but it probably will. Now, remember, add the grease. But when it finally gives out on you, if you're still doing that sort of carving, go buy a big one. Go buy an expensive one, okay? But to start out with, there's a great bargain right there, all right? If you're a welder, don't buy it. Actually, I have a larger grinder from Harbor Freight that I use when I'm welding. I believe it's a 7 or 8 inch. And I did the same thing. I opened it up, I put the grease in it. I've had it a number of years. I don't do a lot of welding, but it's held up well. Okay. Next thing I'd like to mention is the drill press. Now, this drill press sitting back here is a Central Machinery. That's one of Harbor Freight's brands. Okay. This is actually considered a bench top, although it's a big bench top. And when I bought it, I believe the list price on it was $289. I'm not absolutely sure right now. It's one of those situations where I use their coupon and I save money. I waited until it was on sale, and I bought it. And that's a workhorse. I have used the heck out of that thing, okay? And I have never had a problem. I'm sorry, I've had one problem, and that's common to drill presses, and that's that the number 2 taper here, the Morse taper, pops loose. All right, that can happen to any drill press because that's there partially to transfer the energy, but also as a safety, all right? If things get locked up, hopefully it'll pop loose there. All right, if yours does that, all right, clean the surfaces, clean the taper here and the inside of the hole, let it dry, put it back together, hit it a few times with a mallet, you'll be fine. All right, so this has been in my workshop, let's see, it was in the last house. I've probably had it for 15 years, roughly, okay? I have done everything from machining, and this is why I've got the X-Y Vise, parts for firearms, to drilling little holes and things for wood, okay? It's great when I've got to hog out some material with a Forstner bit. It's great when I've got to do large cuts with hole saws. Try and do that with hand because it's a really good way to hurt your wrist. Or when I just need a bunch of precision holes. Of course, anytime you're working with a drill press, you have the advantage that it's absolutely perpendicular, assuming you've got it set up right. So, great tool. Unfortunately, it's no longer available. However, Harbor Freight has replaced this one for a newer model that's a Bauer. It's not the Central Machinery, so that is, according to their structure, that's a better quality tool, and it's $299. I would say it's well worth buying, okay? Great tool, very handy. It's much handier than you would think for woodworking. Another power tool I've got that's a Harbor Freight special is this belt sander. Again, this is Central Machinery, and again, they don't sell it anymore. They have a Bauer that has replaced it. Now, when I bought this was a combination belt sander and 6-inch disc sander. As you can see, the disc isn't on there anymore. I removed that pretty early on, and mostly I removed it because of a space issue where I had it at that time. But I also found that it overlapped here just a little bit, which made it a little difficult when I was trying to run larger pieces past my sanding belt. So I felt I didn't need it. I removed it. Since then, I've built a 12-inch, actually it's 11 3/4 inch disc sander that attaches to my lathe, and if I need a disc sander, I can do it over there. But for most things, I find the belt is adequate. This is another workhorse that I've had for a lot of years, much longer than I've had that, actually. I've probably had this 20 years. I don't even remember for sure when I bought it. It gets used almost every day. It gets used a lot. It gets used in a lot of things where I'm putting enough pressure on it that I bring the belt to a stop. Now, if there's anything I would say negative about it, I'd like to have a bigger motor on it. Okay, I believe it's got a 1/2 horsepower motor. I'd love to have a 3/4, even a 1 horse, and maybe one of these days I'll replace the motor. But it does the job. It's durable. It's held up well. It does a great job for me. Again, like I said, this particular model is no longer available. It's been replaced by a Bauer, which is $119. If I remember correctly, I paid $69 or $79 for this, but that was 20 years ago, okay? So some of these big power tools, I'd say the simpler big power tools, where you don't necessarily need high precision, you can do great at Harbor Freight, all right? I don't know about their table saws. Now they have 2 table saws. They're both contractor saws. One's Bauer and the other is a Hercules. I've looked at them in the store based on the fence more than anything else, and that's the first thing I look on any table saw. I would not buy the Bauer, but I would buy the Hercules. Just my opinion, okay? The Hercules looks to be a good saw. I have not used it, so I really can't say, all right? 2 other tools I want to mention here in the power tool category: air compressors. Now, air compressors can get ridiculously expensive. I have had 2 air compressors in my life. Both of them came from Harbor Freight, and I'm going on 30 years of having air compressors. I keep hoping that the one I have will die so I can replace it with an upright air compressor. It's one of the horizontal ones. If I can put an upright, it'll take up less room in my shop. Hasn't died, so I'm still using it. It just won't die. You know, it's rugged. It's held up extremely well. Actually, the one I had before, which was smaller than this one, I bought this one before that one died because I was doing something. I was actually drilling a well that was with an air-driven drill, and I needed more air capacity than the compressor could supply. I needed to hook up 2 air compressors, and actually 3, and I borrowed my buddies too. And so, yeah, that was fun, making the manifold to hook all that together. But anyway, so when I got done, I gave away the smaller one, and I've kept the bigger one. And so neither of them have gone out on me. Have I had some things break? Yeah, I had like nipples break, and that can happen on any air compressor, okay? I believe on the old one, if I remember correctly, one of my gauges went bad, and I had to replace the gauge. But air compressors are a fairly simple item, and they're fairly rugged. And the ones I've had, hey, they're not fancy, but they get the job done. And what do I use an air compressor for? Well, predominantly I use an air compressor with brad nailers, okay? But I also use it at times with heavier duty nailers. I have used it at times with air-driven ratchets and impact wrenches working on my cars. And so they've gotten a decent workout. Have they been heavily used? No, but I don't think any woodworker is actually going to heavily use an air compressor unless it's an actual cabinet shop, okay? Along with that, another thing I'd like to mention is they have a Merlin hose reel that's got rubber hose on it. It's the type of thing, remember you'd go get your tires changed and there'd be a hose reel up there hanging from the ceiling and the guy would pull the hose down? I've got one of those, okay? It's mounted to the front of a 2x4 shelving unit here in my workshop, and that's where my air supply comes through for my brad nailers, okay? It's not a fancy tool, not an expensive tool. They're selling for $99 right now. If you want to keep your shop clean and organized, it's worth the money, okay? If you're going to use any air tools, you either need to plumb your air to your bench so that you can just use a long or short hose, or you need some sort of a hose reel like that so you can get rid of it when you're not using it. So that's about the extent of what I'm going to tell you about power tools. Do I recommend going in there and buying circular saws, drills, routers? I honestly can't tell you. All right, let's talk about some miscellaneous items here that really don't fit in any of those categories, but still I think are well worth buying in Harbor Freight. First of all, hydraulic jacks. Harbor Freight has probably got the biggest line of hydraulic jacks of anywhere I've seen. They have got floor jacks and they got bottle jacks, okay? Both of these came from there. I've got a couple more bottle jacks. This is the only floor jack I've got. This is a low profile floor jack, which is really nice when the tire on the car is flat and you're trying to get under there. Their jacks range from this is actually a really inexpensive floor jack for a low profile floor jack. Back when I bought this, it was like $50, and that was about maybe 18 years ago, okay? I'm sure the same model is more expensive now, although I didn't check the price of it. But they've got from this up to, say, 20 tons. So you got a whole range depending on the kind of vehicles you're trying to deal with, okay? I had a couple, back when I had a motorhome, I had a couple of 10-ton, this is a 20-ton, 10-ton bottle jacks that I got from Harbor Freight that I used to use for leveling. You know, I didn't have those fancy leveling systems in my motorhome. I just had a couple of jacks, and I'd stick them under the frame and I'd jack them up. Worked great. Right? Motorhome weighed something in the neighborhood of 13,000 pounds. So that's 6.5 tons, and they're 10-ton jacks. So actually one of them could do the job, but it was more stable using two. So for the money, their jacks are great. If you need a hydraulic jack of any sort, this 20-ton I bought when I was doing a remodel/repair job at my mother's-in-law's. Termites had gotten into the understructure of a room that was raised up a little off the ground, and we had to redo it, and I had to level the walls, and I used that to jack up the walls. Okay, worked fantastic, and haven't used it for anything else since because I don't usually need 20 tons, and I've got smaller jacks I can use. Nevertheless, you know, if you needed a hydraulic jack, I don't know anywhere you're going to get a better deal and still get a quality jack. Disposable paintbrushes. Now, I'm not big on disposable paintbrushes. I like buying quality brushes and reusing them. But there are some things where it just plain makes sense to use disposable brushes. I actually got started using Harbor Freight's disposable paintbrushes when I was doing some fiberglass work, and I needed to spread my fiberglass resin, okay? And, or it was actually epoxy. And I was in Harbor Freight, and I took a look, and I found that they had inexpensive paintbrushes that were too good to call them disposable paintbrushes, but were cheap enough to make them disposable. So, so I have here a 1-inch and a 2-inch, and these are two sizes that I stock all the time. That 2-inch one is $1.99, and so if I got to use it, I got to throw it away. I don't care. In the meantime, while I'm using it, I'm working with at least a decent quality brush instead of like one of those little chip brushes or one of those foam brushes. It's giving me a much better finish. It's thicker, it's got more bristles, it'll hold more of whatever finish material or whatever else I'm trying to use. And, you know, keeping some of these around makes it easy when I need something, you know, maybe even for varnishing something and I'm not going to have time to clean it up, okay? I can use one of those, throw it away. So I really like keeping their low-end brushes, well, they call it their good grade of brushes, okay, on hand just for that. And at the price, you can't beat it. A face shield. This is their face shield. Now, there are much nicer face shields out there, okay? There are some absolutely incredible face shields that different companies are putting out. If you want to spend $250 for a face shield, this is $19.99. I bought this when I got my lathe because if you've ever used a lathe, things come flying off sometimes. And so I decided I had to have a face shield. Went into Harbor Freight because it was at a time when I was like, I don't really want to spend $250 for a face shield. Found this hanging on the wall. It has been hit a few times by flying pieces off my lathe. Works great. $19.99. I mean, come on, hard to beat that for protection. We're talking about your safety here. Also, speaking of safety, dust masks. Now, there's two basic styles of dust masks. There's this style, which is kind of based on the disposal ones, okay? And there's the ones that have the cans on the side and you got your face shield built in. Because I wear glasses, I find those hard to work with, okay? And often when I'm wearing them, I'm wearing hair protection. This has got a disposable liner with activated carbon, okay? Does a great job. It has the exhale valve, so I don't feel like I'm suffocating in there. I'm always using fresh air. This is I believe it was a $20 item. They also have the other kind as well, if that's what you want, all right? But it's an item that you can easily get overpriced on, simply because whatever the market will bear. All right, so that's I buy those from Harbor Freight because I think it's for the money I'm getting a great product. Here's an oddball item that you might not even think of, is a hardware dish, a magnetic hardware dish. I've got a couple of these. They're actually designed for mechanics to use when they're working on a car, so you can put the hardware somewhere, and I use them for that. But I also use them when I'm taking apart, say, the vacuum cleaner or a power tool or whatever, and I'm working on it, and I'm taking hardware apart. I don't want to lose that hardware. So this is usually stuck to my bench vise, and I can put my hardware in there. Great little tool, whole $3.99. And every once in a while, they've got them on that coupon thing that you buy anything, you can get one of those for free. So, well worth having. And then the last item I want to talk about in this miscellaneous category is they've got a extension cord reel. And I talked about the hose reel a little while ago. This is an extension cord reel. I believe it's got 20 feet of cord. I've got one hanging up here in my shop, and I use it to bring power to tools that aren't close to an electrical outlet. Okay, most of the time my table saw and my radial arm saw are connected to it, but if I want to use my planer, I disconnect them and haul the end of the cord over there to the planer and I connect that. Yeah, I could get more wiring in here, and one of these days I probably will. I just did add some wiring because I put in a mini split, and I split off a separate electrical circuit just for dust collection, so that I'm not running my dust collection and my tool on the same circuit, and really, you know, that's getting iffy as far as the power that the circuit can handle. Okay, but that cord reel makes it great if you're one of these guys that got all your power tools on stands around the corners of your room, so you can pull them out and put them back, you know, and that's a great way of doing things. My shop isn't set up that way, but it's a great way of doing things. So if you've got your shop set up that way, and you want to be able to get power to all those tools when you bring them out, this is a great way to do it. You hang it in the middle of the room, bring the tool out, there's your power right there, plug it in, you're ready to go. So that's a $39.99 item. I think when I bought mine it was $10 less, but that was a lot of years ago, and it'll make life a lot simpler for you. So those are the basic categories that I wanted to mention to you, and the basic tool. Like everything I've mentioned, with the exception I think the bar clamps and those hex keys, are things that I actually own and actually use. Okay? Now, in addition to the things I just said, let me say this. There are times when you need something special for a remodeling project. Like the thing that comes to mind is a tile cutter. Now, if you're going to tile your bathroom, you're going to need a tile cutter. Okay? So there's a lot of specialty tools that fall more in the category of carpentry than woodworking. But every woodworker I know ends up doing remodeling projects on their home. Since it's not something you're going to be using all the time, I would highly recommend, if you're going to buy those kinds of tools, buy them at Harbor Freight. Why? Because we're talking about something you use once, maybe twice. You don't need to invest a lot of money in it. Get what you need at Harbor Freight. When you're done with it, give it to somebody else, or stick it in the attic or something in case you ever need it again. So that's another whole area you could look at. And I didn't really mention that in this video simply because that's not something we deal with every day. All these tools I've talked about here are pretty much things that we use more or less every day. So I'm sure there's some other items you could find, or maybe you have found that you use that are from Harbor Freight, and that's great. If you want to mention those in the comments, you know, maybe we can get a little lively discussion going. If you just want to badmouth Harbor Tools, you know, we really don't need to hear that. We all know they aren't the greatest out there. We all know that they don't compete head-to-head with Milwaukee or DeWalt or whatever your favorite brand is. Okay, we get that. But for a lot of us, saving money on our tools is important, and Harbor Freight is a great tool for us in saving money on our tools.